In addition to having the blessing of working with a remarkable group of 10th graders in Arlington who made that project seem within reach, could we actually analyze every TED Talk ever published? This was 2 years ago. It would have been a little bit more of a task today. But in addition to that relationship, every morning and every afternoon, my son, at that point 3 years old, a pre-K kiddo, and I would drive to school and drive home. And one day he announced, and I have to believe his teacher must have set him up for this, but the way young people's minds work, it almost doesn't even matter. And he said, "Papa, do you know what I'm going to be?" And almost without taking a breath, we knew where he was going. He said, "I'm going to be a Lego builder in Denmark. I'm also going to do rock and roll. I'm going to fly rocket ships lots of places." And I'm thinking he's done. "And I'm going to be king." Now, what's wonderful about that is he learned a couple basic rules. One, it is good to be king. Two, at that point in time, he knew there was no "yeah, but" to that list. They were all absolutely true. I think Andres, as he kicked us off this morning, reminded us to a degree that it wasn't even the Lego builder in Denmark or the "I'm going to do rock and roll" or even the king. It was the fact that those meshing together, that complex spirit of, was the real gift that my young son at that time was offering me. And as a teacher, I struggled with something pretty simple. And that was, I had no doubt in August that my students were capable of the extraordinary. The problem was that I was worried if we didn't do it right, I would let them down. And I think to a degree, what I want to do today is to take on this challenge of how do we as educators, parents, community members, those that are invested in the future of learning in any capacity, how do we take on the challenge of honoring that extraordinary, complex spectrum of possibilities, guide, mentor, coach, even offer discipline, and not get in the way of their possibilities? So to a degree, as a day job, what I'm very blessed to do now, I'm still the teacher on the team, but I work for a global group of designers that design learning environments, very much like Roseanne. In fact, we were over in Denmark in May and had an opportunity to see her world. It is extraordinary. The pictures only hint at it. And essentially, when we're asked to design the future of learning, there's a very architectural end result. And while there are a couple of images I'll share, the point isn't necessarily the space or the furniture or even the buildings. There's a question that underlies all of these decisions. In this case, independent school outside of Chicago wanted to take a building that was over 100 years old and bring it back to life, but they said, if our teachers aren't colliding, start over. And so in essence, this was an expression of two things. Young people in this day and age have a default setting of curiosity and collaboration. They assume agility. But as educators, we're not necessarily given permission to collaborate, to team up at the speed of what about now? What if? So how can we design environments that make agility the norm, that allow a math class, an arts class, and a humanities class to collide together? And in essence, allow the questions that kids are asking, the projects the faculty are mentoring, to guide the process as opposed to the class, the bell, and even the grade point average. Here in Indianapolis, the International School of Indiana asked us to go on a similar journey. Again, they knew that a new campus would allow them to do a number of things. But in that was this idea that from the youngest of ages, our young people should expect to ask bold questions, that he should expect to work in multiple scales of time, team, idea. And in essence, how can we begin to imagine spaces that not become the rule, but in essence become a catalyst, and over time even get out of the way? In Chicago, on the south side of Chicago, in a neighborhood where 90% of the families, that child, that 5, 7, 8-year-old will be the first child to go to college if we're 90% free and reduced lunch, which is again shortcut for saying extreme poverty. A school came to us and said, not only do we want our remarkable young kiddos, public school kiddos, to have a remarkable school, we want to put more energy back into the grid. So can we take 10 acres of industrial wasteland in the south side of Chicago as a public school and turn it back into an urban farm? The kids said to us, put sheep on the roof. So we are attempting to live up to that. In Istanbul, in Turkey, the largest foundation in that country, they are responsible for about 20% of GDP for-profit and nonprofit. So it's the Gates Foundation, but a scale larger, said to us, create a prototype school so that teachers can leapfrog 2 and 3 generations of technology and resource. Leapfrog 2 to 3 generations. Most of Turkey is still a developing nation. Into the 21st century, and none of us really know what that means. But the second question, as you're designing this building, there's a greater challenge. Young women at the age of 12 have to make a decision between their faith and going to school. Can they be a devout Muslim and also go to school? Can we design for that capacity? So I want to admit a few biases. I have 2 kiddos, and I'm going to take a second and step away from the world of designing schools, as fortunate as that is to be on a team that's asked to do that. At home, their mother and I, mother's a middle school head, and I used to be an English teacher and a summer camp counselor. We argue a lot about what's it going to look like. The more we argue, the more we begin to realize that this vision, the one we were trained to do, the adorable lunchbox, standing in line, the turkey print cutouts on the fridge, the idea that if you stand in line, we can promise you what's at the end of it. It's difficult when so many parents in their 40s with master's degrees are not relevant to their industry anymore. It's challenging when the cover of Newsweek says that the very thing we're fighting for may in fact be the worst investment. The highest debt load in America is not credit card, it's now higher ed. There's a 0 correlation between grade point average and your sophomore year of college. There's a 2 out of 7 default rate for adults going back to online universities. And also, we are making it more and more impossible to not go, and more certain we will be bankrupt. So the real question becomes, how do we imagine a future that embodies the wonder? And as I imagine, I'm starting a project with my own kiddos where I'm writing them letters on a weekly basis, not to tell them truth, but to say, I don't always know. And one of them now is you're 7 and you're 4. And I don't know if it looks like college. Now here's the thing, here's the irony. I know how to hack the game. I know how to position my 2 young kiddos. I know how to put them in a position to thrive. I still don't know if college is going to make sense. And not because there's a particular challenge, but because the future, if we really look at the trends and are honest, it doesn't look like the thing that all of us benefited from. As I go back, I try to imagine as a designer quite literally, and we invite our partners and clients not to trust us, we invite them to go on an expedition of wonder. We invite them to imagine what's possible, and can we design towards that? So I'm using the phrase of Base Camp of Wonder. I used to lead a lot of expeditions. I took kids out on the road, and most people would look at this thing and think, the last thing in the world I want to do is live in an RV with 8 adolescents for 24 days, travel 8,000 miles. I hope it's a metaphor. When we said to these 8 high school kids, sophomores, juniors, and seniors, we're going to travel the U.S. for a month, our only expectations of you is you treat each other well and you're willing to get lost. Be curious. Our rules were simple. There will be no maps. For a year, the kids drew out maps. I want to go to Disney World. I want to go to this beach. I want to meet the stars. I want to get lost in the Dakotas. The problem was nobody was willing to go on a journey because we already knew where we were going. Second of all, no interstates unless safety called in. So how do you take an RV into the part of the U.S. that's not known? And in essence, we were creating a new vision for education. We were inviting these kids to go out without knowing where we were going in order to be attuned for their radar to be electric. We used to flip coins quite literally at interstates, middle of Texas, middle of Nevada, middle of Indiana. Flip a coin, left, right. And also, more importantly, to say to the kids, when do you want to flip the coin? Which for a young person, they're willing to get lost as long as they have ownership. We asked them not to eat fast food for a month, which in its own right was an epic challenge. But what we said is, collect stories from people along the way. And it turns out that breaking bread, sitting down with somebody, being curious, is an extraordinary way to find mentors and guides and experts. We asked them to read the same text, Walt Whitman's Song on the Open Road, every single day aloud, word for word, no matter where we were. Parking lot of a laundromat in Mississippi, on the beach of Pensacola with dolphins, in the Grand Canyon. Not just to learn it, but in order to learn each other's voice as they read that aloud day after day after day. We asked them to ask tough questions, but the real truth is, when you're an adolescent and you've never spent time in Vegas, that's awesome. But when you wonder why there's a woman who is clearly homeless and not fed sleeping against a McDonald's while we're promised great fortune. An adolescent's question shifts from AP scores to what's my impact in the world going to be. And finally, we gave permission to kids not just to write, but also to daydream. And in essence, what I wonder now as a parent and as a school designer and as an advocate for the future of learning is, are we brave enough to get out of the way, but more importantly, to create conditions for wonder? Are we willing to wonder with our kids? And in essence, are we willing to be brave enough to say, the truth is, you may have to come up with your own version? Thank you.